It's finally time to ask away. We've been watching your questions come through all day, and I have to say, you never fail to deliver. Our behind the scenes team has been busy collating your most probing questions, and our speakers are ready and waiting. But before we welcome them back, I have the results of today's live polls to share with you. So let's take a look. For the first question, we asked you whether 50 million people live A, in modern slavery, B, with dangerous levels of lack of food, or C, both. Well, 77% of you answered correctly, and we wish this was wrong, but the answer is C, both. It's a horrible statistic, but it's also terribly sad that so many of us knew reading the options that the answer was most likely both. If you want to find out more, check out the report, Global Estimates of Modern Slavery, Forced Labor and Forced Marriage, and head to the World Food Programme's website. Our next question is about where we go from there, from that tough statistic. We asked, what will you do to raise awareness and build support for humanitarian action? And you answered. 10% of you said you'd be active on social media, call for increased support, and engage in conversations about solutions. 30% said you'd direct your energy into supporting initiatives and organizations that create positive impact. 3% of you agreed to use your political power to create strong alignment and robust political support for humanitarian action. And 56% absolutely mean business, pledging to do all of the above. That's what we love to hear, and that's what it's going to take. And we especially love to hear that the next most popular answer was about organizational change, because supporting the organizations that are doing the work on the ground, like so many of our speakers today, is actually what it's going to take. Finally, we asked, what will you do to contribute to ending modern slavery? 21% said you'll take action to change your consumption habits and improve your footprint on people and the planet. 9% will go a step further in pushing for strong national and international anti-slavery legislation, measures, and regulations. 12% of you will create a demand for greater disclosure and only support companies that use fair supply chains and provide decent working conditions, knowing you must educate yourself about the choices. And again, 58% aren't messing around. They'll be doing all of the above if they aren't already, which is definitely the ultimate goal. Like we said at the start of today, we're not asking for small gestures here. And again, I love that the second answer was about personal responsibility, because the work, of course, is figuring out how to take bold action in a practical, concrete, everyday way. That's something our speakers have been weighing in on, and that's where we all need to hold ourselves and each other to account, to take ownership of these challenges and the solutions. And speaking of our speakers, let's get to your questions. Speakers, thank you so much for joining us again. I'll be calling on you directly, so be ready to unmute. And just a gentle reminder to keep your answers tight so we can get through as many questions as possible. That would be fantastic, but we are just so happy to be with you today. So first up, I have a question for everyone. And it comes from Michelle Deutschmann in Germany. I have my trusty iPad here with the questions coming in real time. So Michelle asks, we so often hear that young people are the solution. From your perspective, is it fair to place the burden on them? And how can we ensure their inclusion at all levels and in all sectors? So why don't I go to you first, Eneni? And Eneni is the Nigeria lead of strategic communication and knowledge management at DAI, who we saw in the panel responding to the times, equity, access, recovery. So Eneni, over to you.
I agree. We do often speak about the youth, and I understand the sentiment. The youth are more urgent. They are less willing to be patient with issues. They understand that they will be left holding the bag if they wait too long on issues of poverty, on issues of climate and sustainability. However, I think that something that happened in my home country, Nigeria, can answer this question for us. In last year, we had a social movement to address social injustice in Nigeria, and youth took to the streets like never before. The solidarity behind them was palpable from every part of society. However, I think that what could have improved on this movement to bring better social justice to Nigeria, and there were successes from this movement, the NSARS movement, would have been if the older people, so people who are more established and entrenched in the private sector, in the development sector, in government, had taken the baton from them and now engaged more formally with government. So in order to build the sustainable economic systems that we want, we cannot leave it to the youth and the youth alone. We need the energy, the drive, the insistence of the youth, the tools, the technology, the ideas, but then we also need to engage with establishment, with the political systems, and make sure that we begin to do things radically different from what we are doing right now.
Sounds about right to me. Nasreen, what about you? How do you feel about that focus on youth, and is it a burden?
I just want to echo Uneni what she said. I feel like today time, young leaders do have a lot of responsibilities, and we are feeling like we are running out of time and there's no tomorrow. It's from the right to now, especially thinking about 50 million people today date in 2022, remain in modern day slavery. And those numbers are children and women and young women and girls that has like their basic human rights are stolen from them, and I'm one of them. Out of those 50 million, 28 millions of women and girls, and including young boys, they are in forced labor. I survived that, and I know that how urgent it is for all young adult leaders, corporations, and businesses to not just talk anymore, because there is no point to talk. We need action. And the action is very easy because of technology. We can really bring everyone together and create a circles, especially survivors needs to come here, because we don't have a data and statistics. We don't believe in that. We have an experience, a lived experience that could really help these people. So I want young generation to feel inspired, not feel angry, but have a compassion, that we can get through this. Overall, we all are humans, and we all understand that our actions not only have effect in ourselves, but it has an effect on our communities, our societies, but also it affects on a global level that affects young girl in the most underserved communities. If today everybody, 7.8 billion people, asks question where my clothes come from, we will eliminate millions of forced labor. We will free millions of children from these extreme conditions. When I was in the sweatshop, I was locked in 10 by 10 room with no windows. 15 to 12 hours a day I was working, receiving less than $2 a day, not even having a bed to sleep on. I drank dirty water that made me sick my entire life right now today. So I want these young leaders that this is a good challenge for all of us to come together and not be angry or frustrated, but use our ability, use our tools to find a solution. Thank you.
And see it as a challenge. I think Nasreen, and I should say actually that Nasreen Sheikh is the founder of Local Women's Handicrafts, who we saw in conversation ending modern slavery. But what you did there was so powerful because you both told a personal story, but you also put a face to these statistics that too often don't have a face on them when people around the world are hearing these stories. And both of those things are so powerful in engaging everybody, young, old, and all the way in between. Dowda, can you just weigh in on that question about putting so much hope and perhaps pressure on the youth to fix these problems?
Absolutely. I think the part of the trick of what needs to happen is, the volume is turned up with youth activists around the world, irrespective of what issue we're talking about, right? That is where a lot of the energy is being placed. But I think there's a mistake that it's not for the future, it's for now. And the world and world leaders need to really, really figure out how to include youth meaningfully at the moment in terms of policy design, policy and program implementation, and what it means for that constituency and that group. Not tomorrow, exactly as what the Secretary General said, but today, because this is exactly when it's needed. Again, not for tomorrow, but for today, to put us on the right track and to put us on the road to a more sustainable and a more green future and a fairer future, if we can even get into the moral elements of it as such.
No, that makes absolutely perfect sense. And I should say that Dauda Jabarta is head of the UN SDG Strategy Hub, who we saw in our opening. And with that, I'll come to individual questions for you. And Annie, why don't I start with you? Anita from Spain says, you talked about the power of multi-agent leadership and aggregated efforts. Where is the intersection between these different agents? How do we put all the puzzle pieces in reaching the SDGs together?
Well, I think that there are several platforms that bring together this multi-agent leadership. Some of them are platforms like this through the Sustainable Development Goals. We have several platforms through which we can engage, we can discuss and have alignment on what the vision is. There are also at the country level, several platforms where the youth can engage and where the private sector can engage and where the government can engage. So I think I'll talk about one of such platforms in Nigeria. We have an organization called the Nigeria Economic Summit Group that works with policymakers, works with the private sector, works with development programs, works with donors, and works with firms like DAI that I work for to solve these issues, taking it from the policy level to the programming level to the implementation level. So these sorts of platforms are opportunities for leaders at every level to engage. And it's important that we come to these platforms that convene all our efforts, because if we continue to work in silos, the problems are a lot more difficult and systemic than one constituency can deal with. So it's to find those programs at every level, at your community level, at the subnational level, at the national, and even the regional level. I love the regional collaboration that's happening in Africa now, especially around free trade. The Africa Continental Free Trade area has been established. That would be brilliant to improve the economy of not just countries or regions, but the whole continent. So these are the sorts of collaborative platforms that we all as leaders need to find, engage, and contribute to. There's also the role of the media. And I think that if all of us can use social media as well as traditional media so that we hear the voices of the people engaging in different spaces so that that collaboration and synergy can occur.
And again, there's that personal responsibility that Nazreen alluded to. We are all involved in this process, not just by the choices that we make, but also by the actions that we take. And both of those things in concert, if we're thinking about them critically, can have a huge effect on all the goals that we're talking about right now. And that's so important to underscore. Nazreen, I want to come to a question for you. And actually, the first thing was not a question. This came from Abdulaziz Khatak in Bahrain. He just wanted to say, you are an inspiration and a hero to many girls and women. So we heard that sentiment lots, and we wanted to make sure you heard it too. So the first question for you is, how can we escape the poverty traps that force thousands of people to consume cheap slavery-made clothing? Where lies the responsibility to tackle broken supply chains?
That's a really, really great question. If you see it, majority of 96% of businesses just around the clothing industry, they don't give transparency around their supply chain. So what we need to do is to support that 4% businesses that does give supply chain transparency. And there is a fair trade organization, Fair Trade Certified USA. There's a lot of local movement is happening. Who made my clothes? Bend your clothes, recycles and upcycles them, thrift stores. Those are the things that we can really support on the consumer level. And consumer needs to really understand that, what type of consumption are you consuming? Are you consuming love or are you consuming suffering? And that's a very personal choice. And for many of us, we didn't had that awareness, and Survivor like us is bringing that awareness, because when I was making clothes in that 10 by 10 room for 15 hours a day and stitching same thing over and over, all I was saying is that whoever is going to wear these clothes, they will feel my blood, they will feel my tears, and they will feel my suffering. And 10 years later, I come to America and I see where my clothes are being sold. So people in the Western countries, in rich countries, countries an economy where they're buying 20 times more. And I challenge each youth today and each people today, try to make your own clothes. Just try to make one of your shirt and you will see how much energy it takes. You know, indigenous people, our cultures, our traditions are dying because we are being put into the factories. All these factories from these overseas, they move to countries like Bangladesh, Pakistan, China, India, because there is no human rights due diligence. Children like me, 9-year-old, can be locked into these rooms and nobody will ever find out. And not only that, I will repeat that cycle and my coming generation will repeat the same. It happened to my dad, it happened to my mother, it happened to me. I was very fortunate to survive and find a kind person. That one person that believed in me changed the entire destiny. And what I did as a survivor, still I carry my pain. And as being a street kid, I took a loan and I started this nonprofit organization, you know, Empowerment Collective, to bring what I could do, you know. And I believe that we need food, water, shelter, healthcare. If I had access to those things in an early age, I would have been today much more powerful leader than what I am. I still honor myself, but there is 50 million people today date is stuck and they don't have those skills and those resources. So it is a time for those people who have resources to learn to give, you know. Open your heart, you know. It's okay to have $1 million, but it's not okay to have billions of dollars in your account and you're not opening those resources to these underserved communities. We're asking for just clean water, just basic education, just a simple healthcare so we can be alive and so we can bring more love and not the pain to the world. I
And
hope
that's
you all
such a,
can yeah.
it's such a simple choice. It's choosing suffering and choosing love. But I have to say, we honor your power. It feels like you are so powerful in this movement, but also in this really setting of intention for all of us. And that is really all we can ask. So thank you for that. Dowda, I want to go to you now. We have a question from Sam in India who says, how can we create more trust between the public and the UN such that more people would come forward to be a part of initiatives that bring change and impact the SDGs? How do we bridge that gap between the public and the UN?
Absolutely, great question. And it feeds off of what Nazreen just ended up saying, that in terms of providing the space for people to be able to benefit from basic human rights and basic education and having food on the table and being able to wear what it is that they choose to wear and knowing that it hasn't been touched by modern slavery. I think in terms of trust building, there's a lot of trust that needs to be there for solidarity, for the global world order to sort of continue as it is. The UN's gone through great efforts in all of its processes of recent, where there is a dialogue that needs to happen between the world and the UN and the UN and the world. And I think oftentimes we forget about all of the goods and services at a country level, at a local level, that are provided in that partnership. That the UN provides services for their host governments and for the people within those countries in over 140 countries around the world. And the system that exists within the UN reform structure is very, very directed and very, very intentional in terms of how it's structured there. And I think at the end of the day, again, it goes back to what Nazreen was talking about, that the basic goods and services and human rights across the world for all constituencies need to be there so that we can focus on these other elements. You can't learn if you're hungry. You can't learn if you don't have access to teachers or education or schools. You can't learn properly if you're constantly on the run from climate disasters. And those elements also need to be adjusted. But again, it's not to put world leaders and business leaders and civil society and governments around the world off of the hook. They have that outsized responsibility to provide for their people as entrusted by their governments, as entrusted by them having signed up to the Sustainable Development Goals in 2015. And we can't forget that that is the one thing that is a commonality across every single culture, country, government, and people across the world. This is the vision, and this is what needs to get done. Again, as I was saying before, not into the future, but now, because if we leave it to the future, we're going to very, very quickly run out of time.
That's a perfect segue. We just have a minute or two left, and I want to ask everyone to answer this question as quickly as you can, 30 seconds, what comes straight to your mind. And this one comes from Sharouk Al-Hashimi from the UAE. In this time of turbulence, crises, and war, governments tend to increase their expenditures on internal security, defense, and military. How can we remotivate governments again to invest in the SDGs and keep the action and momentum going? Data, 30 seconds or less, please.
I think it's about activism. It's about citizens around the world turning up the volume, turning up the temperature and holding leaders accountable for that. It's not a moment of nationalism. What we need is global solidarity, and realize, just as we saw with COVID, if one country is safe, it doesn't matter because everything else is going to come into it. And no country is an island in this world that we live in at the moment.
Thank you. Nasreen, just at a gut level, what's your answer to that? How do we motivate governments?
I feel like we need to really remember that we are not a dinosaur and we are not going to become a dinosaur. You know, we are a human being that has ability to think and reimagine the world, where I do see a lot of leaders are stepping into and realizing that. And I want more and more people to become human, you know. Please don't behave like animal. We are not. You know, in my village, it is saying that it takes 99 cycle of rebirth to be a human, you know. So we have come so far. Like if you look at our history, it was so dark. We've come so far and we can go so far. We can really protect this planet and enable basic human rights for all people, and especially all children in this world, if we want, in this coming by 2030, you know, before even 2030. We just need to unite and create that circle. Thank
and
you.
make those 99 cycles count. And in any, the last word on that, quick as you can.
I think that we need to use our political heft as citizens and hold governments more accountable. And I think the United Nations has a role to call out nations even more, to remind them of what they signed up to with the SDGs. And yes, internal security is important because without security, there can be no development. But I think we need to balance it out.
Thank you so much. So call ourselves out and call everyone else out and call them in as well. Thank you so much. And with that, sadly, we are out of time. Huge thank you to everyone who submitted questions, and of course, to our brilliant speakers. If you enjoyed this session as much as I did, you can tune in at the end of days 2 and 3 for more of the same. And remember, if you missed any of today's sessions or want to hear more from these incredible speakers, you can find them all on demand at sdgactionzone.org. But we're not quite done yet. I'll see you again in just a moment to close day 1 all the way out. So stay with us.